Ever find yourself like reaching for your phone, almost without thinking about it, even when you know there's probably nothing new to see? Or like that little jolt of energy when your email notification goes off? Today, we're going to try to answer that question, why we do the things we do, with a deep dive into the science of learning.
What's fascinating is how much of this learning, it kind of happens under the surface, right?
Hmm.
We're constantly being influenced and shaped by our experiences, but we don't even realize it.
It's like our brains are like secretly running these programs and we don't even know the code. So I'm going to decode it with me. But like first things first, what even is learning?
Learning. Well, at its core, it's about change, lasting change in our behavior because of something we've experienced. It's not just, knowing more stuff, but about that knowledge actually changing how we act or react really in the world.
Okay, so it's about action, not just like information overload. I like that. But how do we even begin to like untangle all the ways learning happens?
It turns out there are different types of learning, each with its own set of rules. Today, we'll uncover 4 big ones: habituation, classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. Don't worry, we'll break these down so they make sense not just in a textbook, but, in your life.
Intrigued. Let's start with habituation. Sounds, I don't know, kind of simple, but I have a feeling it's sneakier than it sounds.
You're right, there's more to it than meets the eye. Habituation is essentially our brains getting really good at ignoring things. You ever had that construction noise outside your window? Drove you crazy at first,
Yeah.
but eventually you barely even noticed.
Oh, absolutely. Tell me you have a scientific explanation for why that becomes the new normal.
Of course, it's habituation. Your brain figures out. That sounds annoying, sure, but not actually important, not dangerous. So it starts to filter it out, lets you focus on other things. It's a basic form of learning, but it helps us save mental energy.
Makes a lot of sense. But what happens when something changes, like the construction suddenly stops? I feel like I almost always notice that.
Exactly. Dishabituation. Your brain, it's always looking out for what's new, what's different. When something familiar, even if you tuned it out, suddenly changes, disappears. Your brain's like, hold on, what happened to that? Could be important.
So even when we think we've tuned something out, our brains are still like kind of listening in the background?
Sometimes our brains don't just re-notice something, they get even more sensitive to it. Imagine a clock ticking, you've habituated to it. Now imagine you're waiting for a really important call. Suddenly that tick, it's so loud, right? Distracting. That sensitization, your brain turns up the volume because of what's going on.
Okay, that's habituation, simple concept, but wow, way more going on under the hood. What's next on our learning adventure?
Let's talk about something you might have heard of: classical conditioning. Think Pavlov's dog, one of the most famous psychology experiments out there.
Ah, Pavlov. Food, bell, drool, right?
You got it. Pavlov noticed dogs naturally salivate when they see food, right? That's an unconditioned response, just a reflex. The food is the unconditioned stimulus. It naturally triggers that response. No learning needed.
Makes sense. But where does the conditioning come in?
This is the cool part. Pavlov starts ringing a bell-neutral stimulus at this point, right before the food. Over time, the dogs, they start associating the bell with, oh, food's coming.
So wait, are you saying the dog started drooling at the sound of a bell?
Exactly. Drooling at the bell alone, even without the food there. The bell had become a conditioned stimulus, triggering a conditioned response, drooling, even though by itself a bell has nothing to do with food.
That is wild. Their brains, learn to connect those two things. But how does this play out in our own lives? I'm not exactly drooling at bells all day long.
Maybe not bells, but we're being conditioned all the time. Think about that feeling you get when you hear your text message shown. That little sound, meaningless at first, now it means, ooh, message. Or how about that jolt of anxiety when you hear your boss's ringtone? Classical conditioning, a sound linked to an emotional response.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. Our brains are constantly making these connections, like a whole hidden language of associations.
And that language, it shapes so much of our behavior. But we've only scratched the surface. What if I told you our actions have a huge impact on what we learn too?
Oh, okay, this is getting good. Tell me more.
Let's talk operant conditioning, where rewards and consequences take center stage.
Okay, rewards and consequences. Sounds kind of like, dog training 101. But I'm guessing this applies to us humans just as much, right?
Oh, absolutely. Operant conditioning, it's happening all the time, whether we realize it or not. Basically, we're more likely to do things again if they lead to something good.
And avoid the stuff that doesn't, right? Makes sense. Like, you're way more likely to study for a test if you aced it last time you hit the books.
Right, good grades, good motivation. But what about when we do things to avoid something bad happening? Like, I always wear my seatbelt, not because I, enjoy the feeling, but because I really don't want a ticket.
You got it. And that's a key point. With operant conditioning, it's not just about, seeking pleasure, avoiding pain. It's how those consequences, good or bad, they shape what we do next time. Wearing your seatbelt to avoid a ticket, perfect example of negative reinforcement. You're repeating a behavior to prevent a negative outcome. Okay, I think I'm getting it. Positive reinforcement is getting something good. Negative reinforcement is avoiding something bad. But what about straight up punishment? Where does that fit in?
Punishment, that's all about decreasing a behavior. Two types. Positive punishment, you're adding something unpleasant, think speeding ticket. And negative punishment, taking away something pleasant, like maybe no TV for a week. Both are trying to make you less likely to do that thing again.
Okay, I think I'm with you. Rewards make you do things more, punishments make you do them less, and each of those can work by either giving or taking away. Did I get that right?
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. It's not just about these big, obvious rewards and punishments, Our brains, they pick up on even the tiniest reinforcements. Think about scrolling through social media, right? Each comment, it's like a mini reward, a little hit of dopamine keeps you coming back for more.
You're telling me. I never thought about social media like that, but it's true. Those notifications are like candy for our brains.
They are. Which brings us to B.F. Skinner, a psychologist who really dug deep into operant conditioning. You ever heard of the Skinner box?
It rings a bell, I think. Something to do with rats.
You got it. Skinner, he designed this box, and an animal, usually a rat, could press a lever, get a little food pellet. He showed how you could shape behavior really precisely just by changing up the rewards and consequences.
So he basically, trained rats to push buttons for treats.
Pretty much, yeah. But it's way more than just hungry rats, right? Skinner's work, it showed how powerful reinforcement schedules are. Even small rewards, but consistent ones, can lead to really strong habits. Think about slot machines designed using those same principles. Intermittent rewards to keep people hooked.
Okay, that's both really cool and kind of creepy at the same time. Amazing how much this stuff is going on without us even knowing. But we've been talking about learning through our own experiences, habituation, classical, operant. Is there a way to learn without having to go through it all ourselves?
There is, and it's a huge part of how we learn, especially as kids. Get ready for observational learning. That's where we learn just by watching other people.
Saves us a lot of trouble, right? Learn without starting from scratch every time.
Sounds efficient.
Hmm.
Which, based on what you said about our brains so far, tracks. So how does this work? Okay, imagine this. You're a little kid watching your older sibling get in trouble, right? Sneaking a cookie before dinner. You think you're more or less likely to try that yourself after seeing that?
I'm going to go with less likely. Learning from someone else's mistake is definitely the way to go.
Exactly. That's observational learning. We see what others do, we see the consequences, good or bad, and we adjust our own behavior. That's how we learn all kinds of things. Social norms, how to do things, even just, how people talk.
So it's like our brains are downloading info from everyone around us, figuring out the rules of the game just by watching.
That's a great way to put it. And it doesn't stop in childhood either. Think about learning a new recipe, finding your way around a new city, or even just picking up new slang. Chances are you're watching others and learning from them.
This reminds me of those viral challenge videos online. People see others doing something crazy and they just have to try it themselves. Is that observational learning too?
Totally. It all goes back to a psychologist, Albert Bandura, and his theory of social learning. He showed that we're especially likely to copy what we see when we see those behaviors being rewarded or admired.
So it's not just about copying, it's about understanding the social value of certain actions. Oh, doing that will make people like me. Makes sense.
And that shows how important role models are, right? Could be parents, teachers, celebrities, even characters in movies. What we see them do and what happens because of it, it shapes us, even if we don't realize it.
This is all so fascinating. But I gotta say, my brain's working overtime here. We've covered so much, from tuning out noises to mimicking TikTok dances. It's wild how adaptable our brains are.
They really are remarkable. And you know what? We're not done yet. We've explored all these different ways of learning, but have you ever wondered what's actually happening inside our brains when we pick up something new?
Now that you mention it. Yeah. Do our brains actually grow when we learn? Are there, Like new brain cells just appearing out of nowhere. Tell me there's some cool neuroscience behind all of this.
Oh, there is. Our brains aren't exactly sprouting wings or anything, but there are some incredible things happening at the cellular level. Get ready for a peek inside the brain on learning.
Okay, so no wings sprouting from our brains when we learn something new, but something's definitely changing up there, right? What's going on?
It's not so much about growing brand new brain cells, more like strengthening the connections between the ones we already have. Never heard of Hebb's rule?
Yeah.
Basically, it says neurons that fire together, wire together. Catchy, right?
So the more we use certain pathways in our brain, the stronger those connections get, like building a mental muscle.
You got it. Every time we learn something new, it's like forging a new path in our brain. The more we walk that path, the more established it becomes. And here's something really interesting. Brain imaging studies. They've actually shown that when we're first learning something new, our brains are going nuts. Tons of activity in different areas. But as we get better at that skill, things calm down. The brain activity actually decreases.
So it's like it takes more effort at first, but our brains get more efficient over time. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Like when you're learning a new dance move, first you're thinking about every single step, but eventually it just like clicks. It just comes automatic.
Exactly. Brains love efficiency, right?
Yeah.
Always looking for the easiest, most streamlined path.
Yeah.
But, and this is important, remember how we were talking about generalization, how our brains like to apply what we've learned in one situation to other similar situations.
Right. Like if you have one bad experience with a dog, you might start being afraid of all dogs, even though they're not all the same.
Exactly. Generalization's super useful, helps us navigate the world without having to relearn everything from scratch. But it can also, lead us astray sometimes. And that's where discrimination comes in.
Discrimination, isn't that a bad thing?
Yeah. Well, yeah, in our everyday lives, discrimination, definitely not good.
Aha.
But when we're talking about learning, it just means learning to tell the difference between things. Recognizing that, hey, not all dogs are the same. Not all bells mean food is coming. Not every situation is exactly alike.
So generalization is like our brain's way of taking a shortcut. And discrimination is more like hitting the brakes, being like, hold on a sec, let's look at this a little closer.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And these two processes, they're always working together as we learn and grow. Generalization lets us make those quick judgments, while discrimination refines them, makes them more accurate over time.
Oh, okay, this is all making sense. But I have a feeling you've saved the most mind-blowing concept for last. What's the deal with this higher order conditioning thing I've heard about?
Ah, yes, higher order conditioning. Okay, imagine this. You're walking down the street and you see a billboard for, let's say, some new soda. Nothing special, right? But now, imagine that same billboard, but it's got your favorite celebrity on it, someone you love, someone you associate with all these good feelings. Suddenly, you might find yourself craving that soda, even if you've never even tried it before.
Okay, that's oddly specific, but I think I see what you're saying. The celebrity is like the bell in Pavlov's experiment. They're already triggering a positive feeling,
Right.
and now that feeling is getting connected to the soda.
You got it.
Yeah.
Your brain's creating this chain of associations. You've been conditioned to connect that celebrity with good vibes, and now, thanks to some clever marketing, that connection's being transferred to the soda. It's like your brain's thinking, well, if I like them, maybe I'll like this too.
That's kind of brilliant and also a little bit terrifying. Like, it makes you realize how easily our tastes, our preferences can be shaped without us even knowing it.
It's true. Higher order conditioning shows just how complex and, yeah, sometimes unpredictable learning can be.
Yeah.
All our past experiences, the connections we've made, they can have these ripple effects, shaping how we see things, the choices we make, in ways we might not even be aware of.
This whole deep dive has been a serious eye-opener. We've covered so much ground, from our brains tuning out noises to, like, why we copy those viral dance moves. It's incredible how adaptable our brains are.
They truly are incredible.
So next time I catch myself, mindlessly scrolling through my phone or feeling that little surge of panic when I hear my boss's ringtone, I can actually, pause and think about what's happening. Recognize the learning at play.
Exactly. Awareness is key. When we understand these forces that are shaping our behavior, we've got a better shot at, making more deliberate choices, maybe even breaking some of those less helpful patterns and building habits that actually serve us.
This has been an awesome journey into the science of learning. I feel like I learned a ton today. Thanks so much for walking us through all of it.
Happy to do it. Just remember, the learning never really stops, right? Every single experience, every interaction, it's all a chance to rewire those neural pathways, shape who we're becoming.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive for today. We hope you enjoyed exploring the science of learning with us. Until next time, keep those brains engaged, stay curious, and never stop exploring the awesome power of your own mind.